Clang, clang, clang. The harsh, metallic shrieks echoed against the cold marble floor, slicing through the suffocating, deathly silence of hundreds of onlookers in the grand hall. A silver crown, encrusted with brilliant sapphires, the ultimate symbol of Aluna's absolute power and sacred devotion, now lay discarded in the frost-covered dust. It was no longer a majestic artifact. Bathed in a cruel, tragic light, it became the exact manifestation of a shattered faith and the violent severing of the most sacred fated bond known to the werewolf realm. Imagine standing before the very person whose soul was supposedly knit to yours by the moon goddess, only to watch them rip your heart out from your chest while the whole world watches in cold apathy. What would you do when the mate who swore to protect you until his last breath suddenly turns into your executioner? Wolf King Stories warmly welcomes you to a journey that strips away the darkest corners of betrayal and bears witness to the glorious rise of an unbreakable spirit. If you are captivated by tales of resilience and karmic justice, please hit that subscribe button to support the channel and give us the motivation to bring you more incredible stories in the future. Now, close your eyes and step into the chilling reality of Evelyn's world. This is not just another standard tale of a rejected mate. This is an epic saga of pride, of a woman who meticulously gathers the bleeding shards of her own dignity to forge an invisible crown far more powerful than the one she lost. To truly grasp the sickening cruelty of the sentence handed down to Evelyn, we must look deep into the abyss of Alpha Damon's betrayal. Standing on the high dais, with eyes as cold as the encroaching winter, Damon uttered lies sharp enough to flay her alive. He did not strip her of her Luna title because she lacked leadership, nor because she had betrayed their pack. He destroyed her using a verdict that strikes at the very core of a female's sacred identity in the werewolf world. He declared her barren. In a brutal, primal society where survival and continuing the bloodline are unwritten laws, a Luna incapable of bearing an heir is cast aside as a cursed pariah. Damon knew this intimately. He deliberately chose the most venomous punishment possible, intending to obliterate not just her authority, but her dignity, her honor, and her divine right to motherhood. Yet, the darkest secret lay festering beneath this monstrous lie. Damon's psychological manipulation exposed a repulsive truth about those who wear the cloak of power, but rot from the inside out with cowardice. He chose to smear Evelyn's name solely to mask his own depravity. He had become intoxicated by another female, a cunning mistress who knew exactly how to whisper sweet flatteries to stroke his fragile, pathetic ego. To legitimize crowning his mistress and to dodge the elders' scrutiny over rejecting a fated mate, Damon needed a flawless excuse. Instead of facing his own fickle nature, he dumped his sins onto the woman who had sacrificed her entire youth fighting by his side. The Barren accusation was a calculated, toxic tactic meant to isolate Evelyn, turning her own people against her in a wave of disgust and alienation. However, what cements Evelyn's absolute greatness in this agonizingly tragic moment is her reaction. Faced with vile slander, pierced by hundreds of mocking and pitying stares, Evelyn did not shed a single tear. She did not fall to her knees to beg. She did not scream to declare her innocence. So many fools in that hall mistook her silence for resignation, for the pathetic surrender of a cornered prey, but they were entirely wrong. In the unspoken language of true inner strength, Evelyn's silence was a deafening roar of ultimate disdain. She looked right through Damon's hypocritical mask, piercing the pathetic, petty, and decaying soul hiding beneath. She knew that defending herself against a monster who orchestrated such malicious lies would be an insult to her own intelligence. The immense pride of a true Luna did not allow her to stoop to the level of someone so morally bankrupt. She chose to walk away with her head held impossibly high, leaving behind a blinded pack drowning in their own ignorance, carrying away a bleeding wound, yet preserving a completely pure and untouchable soul. As she walked away from the decaying heart of her former home, preserving that untouchable soul meant stepping directly into the unforgiving jaws of the savage wilderness. The rogue lands were a desolate expanse of jagged peaks and endless freezing shadows, a place where exiled wolves went to disappear and die. For the first few weeks, the physical agony of the severed mating bond threatened to consume her entirely. It was a visceral, tearing sensation, like shattered glass circulating through her veins with every beat of her heart. The moon goddess designed the fated bond to be eternal. Breaking it unilaterally was an act of profound spiritual violence. Yet, every time Evelyn collapsed into the snow, coughing up blood and gasping for breath, she refused to let the darkness take her. She forced herself to remember the mocking eyes of the pack and the grotesque smirk of the mistress who wore her stolen jewels. That memory became her fire. She hunted with bare hands when she had to, slept beneath the roots of ancient twisted pines, and let the glacial winds freeze the last remnants of her naive affection for Damon. It was in the depths of this excruciating isolation that Evelyn experienced a revelation that would forever alter the trajectory of their world. She was resting near a frozen stream, her body pushed to the absolute limits of mortal endurance, when she felt it, a faint, fluttering warmth deep within her womb. It was a heartbeat, a tiny, miraculous rhythm that defied every vicious lie Damon had spewed from his throne. She was not barren. She was carrying a child, the true heir of the bloodline. The profound, sickening irony of the situation washed over her like a tidal wave. Damon had discarded his fated mate and cursed his own lineage based on a fabricated accusation, entirely blind to the fact that he was casting away his only chance at a legitimate legacy. But as Evelyn placed a trembling hand over her stomach, a fierce, entirely new instinct ignited within her spirit. This pup would not belong to Damon. This child would not be raised in a hall built on deceit, nor taught to measure their worth by the fragile egos of cowardly men. This child belonged to her, to the wild, and to the unwavering justice of the moon goddess. The sorrow that had been weighing down her shoulders evaporated, replaced by a terrifying, majestic resolve. Evelyn realized that survival was no longer enough. She had to conquer. She began to gather the outcasts, the rogues, and the falsely accused who wandered the forgotten territories. To them, she was not a discarded Luna. She was a beacon of sanctuary, a warrior who led from the front lines, bleeding and fighting alongside her people. Through grueling trials and sheer, unadulterated willpower, Evelyn forged an entirely new pack out of the ashes of society's rejects. She tapped into ancient, dormant magics of the land, unlocking a formidable aura that rivaled the most powerful alphas in history. The woman who was thrown to the wolves returned as the leader of the pack, quietly building a massive, fiercely loyal empire in the shadows, knowing that the day of reckoning was inevitable. She was no longer just Evelyn. She was the mother of a dynasty that would never bear his tainted name. The rot of the false kingdom. While Evelyn was drawing immense strength from the new life blossoming within her, the kingdom she had been forced to abandon was rapidly choking on the venom of its own deceit. Alpha Damon had crowned his mistress, convinced that he had secured a future of unchallenged authority and endless adoration. But a crown stolen through treachery is heavy with curses. Almost immediately, a suffocating blight began to spread across their territory. The once lush forests turned gray and barren, the prey migrated away, and the rivers slowed to a sickly, muddy crawl. The pack members, who had once cheered at Evelyn's downfall, now found themselves shivering in the cold, their bellies empty and their spirits broken. The moon goddess does not turn a blind eye to the desecration of her most sacred gifts. The severing of a true fated bond had fractured the spiritual core of the pack's land. Damon, in his arrogance, refused to see the spiritual decay, blaming the harsh winter and the supposed laziness of his hunters. His new Luna, the cunning mistress who had whispered such sweet flatteries, quickly proved herself to be utterly useless in times of crisis. She hoarded the dwindling food supplies for herself, draped herself in luxurious furs while the elders froze, and threw temper tantrums when the pack's reverence for her began to sour into blatant resentment. Stripped of the glamour of her seduction, she was nothing more than a shallow, vain creature who shrank from the heavy, blood-soaked responsibilities of true leadership. Damon found himself trapped in a nightmare of his own making. The honeyed words that once stroked his ego now felt like sandpaper against his escalating anxiety. The elders, who had complacently allowed Evelyn's exile, began to murmur in the dark corners of the grand hall. They whispered of a curse, of karmic retribution, and of the undeniable truth that the pack had been far more prosperous under Evelyn's silent, steadfast guidance. Damon's authority began to crumble from the inside out. He ruled through fear and aggression, punishing anyone who dared to speak of the old days, yet he could not fight the overwhelming shadow of failure that stalked him. He had sacrificed the soul of his pack for a fleeting, superficial desire, and now he was forced to watch as his legacy withered into dust. He had desperately wanted an heir to legitimize his new union, but month after agonizing month, his new Luna's womb remained empty. The universe was executing a flawless, poetic justice. The man who had falsely accused his innocent mate of being barren was now staring into the abyss of his own literal and metaphorical sterility. His pack was dying, his leadership was a mockery, and the moon goddess had long abandoned the soil that drank the tears of an innocent mate. The eclipse of the traitor. It was exactly during this period of desperate decay that whispers of a fierce, rising empire in the uncharted territories began to sweep across the dying lands, forcing Damon to seek salvation from a mysterious new ruler. Word had traveled through the rogue networks of a magnificent Alpha Queen in the north, a ruler who commanded an army of battle-hardened wolves and possessed endless stores of grain and cured meats. Driven to the brink of starvation and facing a total rebellion, Damon swallowed his remaining pride and organized an expedition to grovel at the feet of this northern monarch, hoping to negotiate a treaty or beg for aid. He gathered his frail, exhausted warriors and his shivering, complaining mistress, and journeyed into the heart of the wild. When the massive, iron-wrought doors of the northern fortress finally swung open, Damon and his retinue were brought into a grand hall that put his own decaying palace to absolute shame. The atmosphere crackled with raw, untamed power and unwavering discipline. At the far end of the hall, seated on a throne carved from obsidian and ancient timber, sat the monarch. As Damon raised his eyes to meet the gaze of the sovereign whose mercy he was about to beg for, the breath was violently stolen from his lungs. It was Evelyn. But she was not the quiet, devoted woman he had broken. She was a goddess of war, draped in the pelts of beasts she had slain herself, her eyes glowing with a terrifying, ethereal silver light that commanded instant, bone-crushing submission. And there, standing proudly by her side, was a young, robust boy with piercing eyes, a son who bore the unmistakable aristocratic features of the royal bloodline, yet radiated a strength that Damon could never comprehend. The absolute shock that paralyzed Damon's pack was a symphony of poetic justice. The very woman they had mocked, pitied, and cast out as cursed and barren was now looking down upon them as the supreme ruler of a thriving empire, holding the living, breathing proof of Damon's monstrous lie. The silence in the hall was deafening, mirroring the silence Evelyn had held on the day of her exile, but this time, the power dynamic had completely inverted. Damon's knees buckled. His mistress gasped, instinctively stepping back into the shadows as the crushing weight of Evelyn's alpha aura forced the visiting wolves to drop to the floor. Evelyn did not gloat, she did not raise her voice. She simply looked at Damon with a chilling, detached calm, the kind of look one gives to a diseased insect before stepping around it. She saw through his hollow cheeks, his panicked eyes, and the pathetic, shivering reality of the man who had once thought himself a god. All of Damon's elaborate lies, his grand justifications, and his fragile masculinity were instantly obliterated in the face of her overwhelming, undeniable majesty. He was completely stripped bare, exposed not just to Evelyn, but to his own dying pack, as a fraud, a traitor, and the architect of their destruction, facing the absolute embodiment of a divine wrath he could never hope to conquer. The unbreakable reign, staring up at the magnificent entity that was once his discarded mate, the agonizing realization of his own catastrophic failure, finally broke whatever was left of Damon's fragile sanity. He fell fully to his knees, his forehead pressing against the cold, polished stone of Evelyn's hall, his voice cracking as he choked out pathetic apologies and desperate pleas for forgiveness. He begged her to return, to heal his lands, to bring his rightful heir back to the pack that was supposedly her true home. Behind him, his mistress wept in humiliation, suddenly realizing that she was nothing more than a pawn in a game she had already spectacularly lost. But true justice, the kind that resonates in the deepest chambers of the soul, is rarely loud. It is absolute and final. Evelyn stood slowly, the graceful movement silencing the entire fortress. She descended the steps of her throne, the soft padding of her boots echoing like thunder in Damon's ringing ears. When she spoke, her voice was not laced with venom or rage, but with the terrifying tranquility of a storm that has already passed. She told him that there was nothing left to forgive, because he was no longer a person of consequence in her world. She did not demand his execution. She did not seek to slaughter his remaining people. Instead, she condemned him to something far more agonizing, a long life of living with his irreversible mistakes. She offered trade to his starving people, not out of pity for him, but because a true queen does not let innocent children starve for the sins of a weak alpha. However, the cost of that survival was his immediate abdication. Damon's pack, having witnessed the sheer magnitude of the deception and the divine favor bestowed upon Evelyn, turned their backs on him without a second thought. He was stripped of his title, his lands, and his honor, exiled to wander the very same frozen wastes he had once condemned Evelyn to, accompanied only by the bitter mistress who had poisoned his mind. As the heavy doors of the fortress closed, sealing Damon out in the freezing dark, Evelyn returned to her throne, her son's small, warm hand in hers. She had taken the shattered pieces of her broken crown, forged in the fires of betrayal, and hammered on the anvil of unimaginable suffering, and created an empire that no man could ever dismantle. Her silence on that fateful day years ago had not been a surrender. It had been a solemn promise to the universe, a promise that she would rise. This is the profound truth of the werewolf realm, and of life itself. The deepest wounds inflicted by those we trust are not meant to destroy us. They are the painful, bloody births of our truest selves. Evelyn's journey from a discarded, slandered Luna to an invincible, revered queen stands as a legendary testament to the fact that when you try to bury a woman made of fire and absolute dignity, you only ensure that she will burn the entire world down and rebuild it in her own glorious image. Evelyn's harrowing journey from a discarded, falsely accused mate to a formidable alpha queen is a masterclass in resilience and absolute poetic justice. Cast into the freezing wilderness to perish under the weight of a severed bond and a shattered reputation, she refused to let her betrayer's narrative dictate her destiny. Instead of succumbing to the agonizing spiritual and physical pain, she channeled her betrayal into a fierce, survivalist fire. The discovery of her pregnancy, the ultimate proof against Damon's vicious lies, ignited a majestic resolve to build a sanctuary for the rejected. While she forged an unbreakable empire out of the ashes of society's outcasts, Damon's kingdom rotted from the inside out, poisoned by his arrogance and the superficiality of his stolen crown. The cosmic balance was restored when the starving, desperate alpha was forced to grovel at the feet of the very woman he had broken, only to find an invincible monarch holding his legitimate heir. Her ultimate vengeance was not executed through bloodshed, but through the profound, quiet dignity of letting his own catastrophic mistakes consume him. She conquered not by stooping to his level of cruelty, but by elevating herself and her people above his reach, proving that a spirit rooted in truth and self-worth can never be permanently exiled. She turned her darkest abyss into the foundation of an indestructible legacy, demonstrating that true nobility cannot be stripped away by the fragile egos of cowardly men. Profound lesson and real-life application. The deepest lesson here is that the most devastating betrayals and unjust hardships are often the very catalysts required for our greatest personal evolution. True vindication does not come from screaming your truth at those committed to misunderstanding you, nor does it come from seeking destructive revenge. It comes from radical self-investment. In your current life, When you face toxic environments, professional sabotage, or heartbreaking personal betrayals, resist the urge to fight in the mud. Instead, walk away in silence and channel that agonizing energy into building your own empire, whether that is advancing your education, focusing on your physical and mental health, or building a thriving career. Let your undeniable success and inner peace be your final answer. When you detach from those who do not value you and focus entirely on your own growth, you render your detractors completely irrelevant. Question for the audience. If you were in Evelyn's position and the person who betrayed you begged for a second chance, would you offer them forgiveness? Or do you believe that some betrayals are simply unforgivable? Please politely share your thoughts in the comments section below so we can all learn from each other's perspectives. If you found value in this story and its lessons, please hit the subscribe button. Your support truly gives us the motivation to keep creating and bringing you more high-quality, inspiring content.